I'm Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, and this is Our Middle East. Al-Shaq al-Assad Lana. Today, September 11th, 2025, 24 years since that fateful day when 3,000 Americans lost their lives to jihad. And today, in this studio in Israel, jihad continues. And I'm more than happy to welcome perhaps the most appropriate person to discuss the jihad that is spreading, metastasizing across the Middle East and the West, Mosab Hassan Yousef, son of Hamas, the Green Prince. Mosab, it is really great to have you here in studio to help us understand that the legacy of jihad of September 11th, that dark day in New York and Washington, continues today, jihad tearing across the Middle East. How should we be thinking about it this day? Is it just a memory, or is it a living legacy that has to be fought and defeated?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And yes, this is the 24th anniversary of 9/11 attacks. A very dark day in the American history, where jihadists, by the name of Allah, by the name of the Quran, reciting Quranic verses, justifying the killing of thousands of innocent Americans. Unfortunately, many Americans today, they haven't lived 9/11. They don't remember that day. They don't remember American citizens trying to escape the hellfire by jumping from the 80th floor. They don't remember the firefighters trying to save as many as they could, where they got caught up in the fire and the buildings collapsed on them. Hundreds of American firefighters were killed on that day, as the entire day, the entire world was watching. And unfortunately, today, there's so many people who are in denial, who want even to rewrite history as 9/11 never happened, as jihadists were not behind that. Even some people dare to invert the narrative and accuse the Jewish people of committing 9/11. It doesn't get worse than this. It is a living legacy, and this is a jihad against civilization.
You know, Mosab, you mentioned the spreading conspiracy theories against the Jews, which over the years became much more common discourse. And if we look back to where it was sourced, it was Osama bin Laden himself who talked about Israel, who talked about Palestine as being one of the driving motivations for his massive destruction of America's financial center and governmental and parliamentary center in Washington. This is a moment of moral clarity to explain that the instrumentalization, the objectivization, the use of the Palestine structure to mask jihad is really what the West needs to understand now as jihad tears across the Middle East. And here we are in our Middle East trying to explain it. And you who come from the background, from the culture of jihad, and are here to help us understand what it really means for us today, 24 years after America suffered that jihad and continues to confront it today in America and in the Middle East and in Europe.
Right. Well, it's unfortunately that the situation after 9/11, I remember the world getting unified behind the United States in their war against terrorism. And President George W. Bush at that time was very clear. He said, you're with us or you're against us. You cannot be in between. He defined the lines. But after October 7, which basically jihad against civilization, jihad against not only Israel, it's jihad against democracy and the democratic values And the Western values, I expected and I thought that the world would get united the same way that the world got united behind the United States to defeat jihadists. But today, unfortunately, and after October 7, the world got divided. And within no time, the narrative was inverted, and instead of helping Israel or backing Israel in their fight against jihadists, the world turned against Israel. And this is the difference between 9/11 and today, even though the similarity and the common ground between both attacks are jihad. Yes, I came from that background. The jihad ideology. But my understanding of jihad growing up was not only physical jihad. It was physical jihad, financial jihad, diplomatic jihad, jihad by speech. In fact, in the Quran as legislation, for those who cannot fight physically, they are required to fight financially, to fight with their money. And those who don't have money, they are required to fight by their words. And this is very, very clear legislation. It's a command. And no Muslim is above that. And all those who identify as Muslims and say, no, but we are not jihadists. No, they are jihadists. And they have been demonstrating this since the beginning of the war, this recent war, that by spreading propaganda, victim narrative, false accusations of genocide, apartheid, colonialism, and the root cause of it is their religion. And it's nothing but identity and property theft. The jihadists don't want only to destroy, they want to dominate. They want a developed land. They want to reap the fruits of other civilizations' work. And this is how Islam actually spread throughout the centuries, by invasion, by the means of the sword. And today, they find it much cheaper, much easier to spread jihad through diplomacy, exploiting democracy, exploiting freedoms of the West. And they have been spreading their indoctrination. Palestine and Islam are very similar concepts. Palestine depends on the destruction of Israel, and Islam depends on the destruction of civilization.
This is exactly what Osama bin Laden said in his letter to America months after the 9/11 atrocities. He said, and in subsequent messages, he said that jihad requires the destruction of the infidels against the Muslim world. This is bin Laden stating his doctrine against America, which is an eternal doctrine. It didn't end on 9/11, which is why we see that when the Hamas comes to America on October the 8th, which you called the Palestinian jihad against America and against the Jews, that America needs to understand that it is not a political problem that it is witnessing between Israel and the Palestinians or the PLO and Hamas. This is a continuation of the legacy of bin Laden according to his own words, statements, and doctrine.
Look, Palestinianism, whether people like it or not, is definitely inspired by the Middle Eastern culture. The Middle Eastern culture is shaped and crystallized by the Islamic belief system. And those who are in denial say, they are separate issues. They are lying, simply, or they just don't want to face the truth. The Palestinian indoctrination, the Palestinian ideology, depends on domination. This is why when they were given the huge part of the land, the historic land of Israel, they rejected coexistence with Israel. They rejected a two-state solution, an Arab state and a Jewish state. They simply did not want the Jews, period, canceling the Jewish right to the land. And why is that? Because they consider Israel, or what they call Palestine, which nothing but a Roman name. It's not even an Islamic name. You will not find it in the Quran at all, or in any other Islamic source. It's borrowed only as a medium, as a device to eradicate and annihilate the Jewish people from the region, which basically the Jewish people have roots way before Islam was here. And it's the continuous attempts throughout the centuries, 1400 years of attempts to eradicate and ethnically cleanse the Jewish people from the region. Muhammad started that in the Arab Peninsula in the 7th century, and it continued after that through Umar, through the Amawites, through the Ottoman Empire, and later on it continued from Hajj Amin al-Husseini and Yasser Arafat and until today.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to mention, I'm sorry for interrupting you. I wanted to mention that Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the first Grand Mufti that was appointed by the British colonialists that were entrusted with what they called British Mandate Palestine until 1947, was a close associate of the Nazis, and they had this complete cancellation, destruction, ideology, theology. As a matter of fact, the Hajj Amin, together with the Nazis, called for the total destruction, the bombing of Tel Aviv in those times. But beyond that, why we're talking about this today, connecting September 11th with October 7th, and the continuation of the jihad of October 7th until today, is that Arafat performed a trick. He bamboozled the West by dressing up a jihad mandate for him as a Muslim brother, as a human rights issue, as what he called Palestine, as an issue of human rights, of civil rights, in terms that the West could understand. He was told by North Vietnamese General Giap. He was advised by Romanian communist leader Ceausescu to change the way he presented what essentially was a jihadistic mandate into terms and language that the West could understand. And that's what perhaps has created this real confusion that today has cast the Palestinian issue, whether it's Hamas or whether it's PLO, as a political territorial issue, when it really just is a continuation of 9/11, October 7th, until today, September 11, 2025.
Yeah, definitely. It's the same ideology, just different faces, different fronts, different branches. And all of them, this is why today when you look and see communists and Islamists, jihadists, pairing, it's impossible in reality because their ideologies are extreme opposites. But for some reason now they got united. They got united because they found, first of all, an angry cause. Second, they found a common enemy. And the Americans don't understand the danger of this. That is rebranded as Palestine in the West by the name of resistance, by the name of intifada. In the West, they say resistance. Well, this is not an Islamic term. In Islam, it's jihad. They say intifada. It means jihad as well. So they manipulate and juggle with the terminology to sell Westerners a problem that does not exist. But by doing so, they infiltrate the Western society, and they have succeeded. Of course, the average person is not seeing the bigger picture, that we have communists and Islamists. It's considered by CIA and other intelligence services as the green danger and the red danger. Both dangers pose existential threat to the United States of America. And today we see these major forces attempting to change the world order. They don't want the Americans to lead. And what do they stand for? They stand for dictatorship. They are all dictatorships. They don't believe in freedoms. They are oppressing women. They are oppressing freedom of speech. They're torturing people. And Americans don't understand how dangerous is this. Because if America, God forbids, stops being the leading power, then we are going to be ruled by such savages, by those who would force everybody to kneel before them. And the consequences on humanity and on civilization is devastating.
Mosab, you have mentioned before something that many people have no idea of, which is that the founder or the drafter of the Hamas charter of 1988 was none other than Abdullah Azzam, the mentor of Osama bin Laden, the engineer and the brains behind 9/11. And in fact, Abdullah Azzam was a Salafist, global jihadist, and also he was one of really the establishers and founders of the Hamas charter. And it's that connection between what we're facing today from Hamas's doctrine and the continuation of Hamas's leadership in Qatar, that many people think is a political issue that can be solved by ceasefires and by, some sort of mutual concession. Help us understand where we are in terms of the West thinking, you know what, you can make a deal with Hamas. Hamas can stay in power. They'll return some of the hostages within the context of what we're talking about on this day, September 11th.
Yes, it's very, very important that you brought up Abdullah Azzam. And more importantly, before Abdullah Azzam was Hassan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb. The three leaders created the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is the biggest Islamic movement in the world with more than 100 million active members. And they are in the United States. The danger of the Muslim Brotherhood that they have so many fronts and they rebrand their names to fit and suit each society. Like, for example, in the United States, they are CARE. They are very caring about the Islamic-American relationships. But deep in their hearts, they spit venom when it comes to the American superiority. They don't want to see America superior. They want to dominate America. They want to dominate the White House. They want to take a ride over the shoulders of all the American achievements so they can rule the world towards their Islamic Khilafah. And we know that the Islamic Khilafah is a dead end. It's proven throughout the history. There is no way for them to dominate the world without destroying civilization, and then destroying themselves eventually, because they can never agree on anything. If we have the Muslim Brotherhood, then we have a counter force. It's called the Hizb ut-Tahrir. If we have the Hizb ut-Tahrir, then there is the Islamic, the Salafi jihadists. If we finish with the Salafi jihadists, they will breed another Islamic version that thinks that they are doing the correct form of jihad. Then we go into a loop that is basically endless. And this is why I totally oppose them. You know, if growing up in a jihadi Hamas family, if it was only one vision that was, that all of them agreed on it, I probably would have stayed with them. But I know that they are conflicted on each other, that you really don't know. Okay, so everyone is claiming to be the jihadi. It's the same thing with the Palestinians right now, and Palestinianism and all those who have joined the cause, wrapped in keffiyas, carrying the Palestinian cause as a badge of honor around the globe. You don't know who they are. They could be Islamists, they could be communists, they could be North Korean agents, they could be Russian mafia, they could be the cartel. Anybody is claiming to be just pro-Palestine. And they don't have leadership, the same problem that we are having here. So basically, the Muslim Brotherhood understand that there is nothing more powerful than those who are willing to die for an angry cause. And the danger of spreading hateful indoctrination and radicalization of the West. The Muslim Brotherhood has succeeded in creating the climate where it would breed endless generations of terrorists, fanatics, radical, and there could be also criminal people. And they don't care as long as they are on the path to sabotage the West.
That's a key phrase, sabotaging the West. You know, Mosab, if Osama bin Laden destroyed the Twin Towers in New York, the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad, and even others that are called the PFLP, the DFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, they are bringing down the ivory towers on the university campuses. Because when they say, bring the Intifada to America, when they say from the river to the sea, when they say that professors, many professors on the far left said on October 8th until today, that we have to dismantle and remake America. They are essentially fusing radical left, revolutionary resistance language and ideology with this Arafat, Hamas, bin Laden Islamism. And many in America don't understand that the campuses and cities of America, when these terms are being used, are actually being threatened with exactly the same ideology and lexicon of 9/11 and October 7th, but just in a different context.
Of course, it sounds very strange. Actually, it's stranger than fiction.
It is stranger than fiction.
In a world where we don't have political borders anymore, because the social media and the internet helped Pakistanis, North Koreans, Iranians, state sponsors, bots even, we don't know if they are real or not, to invade the American continent. And what's happening right now, that the governments, they are not prepared for such attack. Throughout, I would say, the last 2 decades, the American government invested so much money in a defense system against cyber attacks. This was the biggest concern, but right now they see that state-sponsored bots, or we don't know if they are real, coming from Saudi Arabia, expressing their belief systems and conveying their indoctrination using the social media, and how much influence they have on the American population, especially those who did not live 9/11, and they don't know how it felt like on that day for so many Americans, who did not live the October 7 atrocities, and they don't know how it feels like to be under the attack of savages. Then Pakistanis and I would say the vast majority of the Muslim world justified October 7 as an act of resistance. And they spread their hatred against the Jewish successful minority. And many Americans, unfortunately, bought the narrative. They bought the narrative that the Jews are basically stealing land and killing people and committing genocide, all baseless accusations. So now, this is what's happening right now in America. America is very, very vulnerable to the enemy and their campaign to divide the United States, especially taking advantage of the already division in the country. So many Americans are anti the foundations of Judeo-Christianity. They don't want that. They don't want the conservative party. And they want other options, multiculturalism, etc. And those are the ones who actually being the extreme left, if you can call them. I don't know actually if you can define them, because they are not one thing. But they are the ones who are not anchored in the American truth, what makes America superior. And they want America to basically compromise its defenses, to compromise its military, to defund the police, to drop all the virtues and ethics that made America superior, and leave America defenseless. And they are succeeding. And again, all the enemy entities from the outside have been working and manipulating those differences, divisions and subdivisions, And what I say, the spread of hateful indoctrination, of the victim narrative, instead of the American resilience, right now, many of the new generation, they feel victimized for some reason, or at least they feel that they failed the Gaza children because they could not stop or they could not divide the United States and Israel. They want the United States overnight to abandon its allies, to abandon its interest, and to become defenseless because they think this is not our business. This is what the Russian intelligence is doing. This is what the Chinese intelligence is doing. This is what the all American enemies coming, and their interest has been aligned, taken advantage of ignorant people or taken advantage of those who have self-hatred within the American society.
Absolutely. Mosab, one of the extraordinary developments in what has been called now diplomatic jihad, not only the physical jihad, is that we have for the first time a overwhelming support coming from Europe for a Palestinian state that is supposed to be voted on in a special session during the upcoming UN General Assembly gathering. And here you have a very dangerous, another trick going on, because if after October 7th, when the jihad came from a de facto sovereign state from within Gaza, completely controlled by Hamas and with elements of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, today establishing another Palestinian terrorist state in the hills above Ben Gurion Airport, above the Jordan Valley, would essentially endanger the entire coastal area of Israel and destabilize the entire Middle East. How is it that Europe particularly does not understand that establishing another platform for another October 7th would be the natural result of support for a Palestinian state?
Look, Europeans are making a historic mistake that sooner or later they will regret it. And in reality, I don't think this is going to affect Israel, because Israel understands its security and its priorities. And there is no force on earth that can actually force Israel to accept an enemy state that has been proven existential threat. The European, or let's say some of the Western leaders, who basically they come and they go, now they choose to calm the angry mob on their streets, which is basically representing their failure, their inner failure. And by exporting their problem and projecting it onto on Israel, they think this is how they can calm the riots and the mob that has unrealistic demands to force Israel to submit to the demands of terrorism. To them, it's not about Palestine, and it's not about Israel. It's about their inner conflict. And they are mistaken, because in reality, they have been feeding the beast. And there is no way that rewarding terrorism, especially after October 7, and all of us watch what happened on October 7, that rewarding Palestinians for their crimes would lead to peace in the region or worldwide. And today, instead of countering this force and reminding the Palestinians that their violence is the root cause of their suffering, what they did, they legitimized the Palestinian cause and they globalized it. Now, there is infiltration of the Palestinian indoctrination pretty much everywhere, from Hollywood to Western politicians to parliaments, mainstream media, the streets, campuses. They have invaded everywhere, and it's not about Palestine. They don't care about Palestinian children. They don't care about Palestine. And now this is not going in vacuum. Sooner or later, they're going to realize that they have invited a very dangerous virus right into their backyard, and it is going to backfire.
Absolutely. One of the major disconnects in the West, and appropriate that we discuss it on 9/11, is they say the extremist jihadistic Hamas and the more moderate secular Palestinian Authority, which many say is basically just the internationalized, legitimized version of the Fatah, of the Palestine Liberation Organization, which was born well before 1964, 1968, before Israel had anything to do with the territories of Judea and Samaria. This is a topic that we want to hear from you to create moral clarity, because the PA incentivizes terror. They have the Pay for Slave program. They engage in international blood libels. You've pointed this out, that in fact, there's no real strategic difference between the Hamas and the Palestinian Authority.
After October 7, and I said this several times, I don't see any difference between Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Palestinian Authority, PLO, even the new generation of Palestinians today in the West who have been indoctrinated and radicalized, and now they are acting on it, spreading hateful speech and worse, spreading violence. I don't think any democracy or any free society can handle, can coexist, let's say, with such a savage mentality that is based on victimhood. Their game is one of the most dangerous games, to weaponize their own children, their own civilians, for a global sympathy, to spread their hateful indoctrination with, for one reason: to delegitimize Israel, to defame Israel, to demonize Israel. And this is the only way for them to gain legitimacy, not by building, not by constructing, not by proving that they are a legitimate society, nation. As I said earlier, they had the same potential like Israel had some 77 years ago. But instead of focusing on building their Arab state, at that time there was no such thing as Palestinian state, they rejected. And their entire focus has been the destruction of the state of Israel. And what is the outcome? You can look at Gaza and see what's the outcome of their violence. And yes, the Gaza tragedy, there is no sane person around the world or here in Israel that is not heartbroken for what's happening in Gaza. But who is the reason behind this? Who weaponized the civilians? And what was their goal? So basically, if people are not able to distinguish and see the difference between the Israeli society and between Israel as a nation, not only as a democracy and as a country, as a nation, with more than 3,000 years of history, and make the comparison to a political movement that was born recently in 1964. That is a violent movement with a false identity, with a false claim as indigenous of the land. This is a lie. The fact that they say that Palestine is occupied and it needs liberation, the very foundation of their movement is based on a lie, because Palestine never existed. And even if it existed back in the history, it was not theirs. It's just a name that they borrowed from the Romans. It's a name they borrowed from the British colonial
the map makers, the cartographers who rebranded the word Palestine on the maps, using the historical precedent of the Romans, as you point out.
Yeah, so basically it's borrowed. And the same thing, you know, if you look, as I told you, why Palestine is a problem, because it's used by the jihadists just as a device. They don't believe in Palestine. Hamas does not believe in Palestine. Yasser Arafat did not believe in Palestine. They just shout out loud Palestine, but their aim is not there. In their conscious and in their subconscious, it's Islam. And Islam's attempt 14 centuries ago was to replace Judaism. They stole the Jewish identity and they called it Islam. It's a stolen identity, nothing original about it. And today they see what's so-called Palestine as an Islamic trust. It's all about Al-Aqsa Mosque. Even look at Hamas attacks on October 7. The name of the massacre campaign is after Al-Aqsa Mosque.
What did they call it?
Tufan Al-Aqsa. It's Al-Aqsa flood. So if you look just a bit deeper beyond the propaganda, and you're going to see that their mosque is sitting on the top of the Jewish temple, the most sacred Jewish site. And it's their attempt to replace Judaism. It's their attempt to replace Israel. And nothing can satisfy their ambition because they are not limited to any political borders. Once they have manifested their plan to destroy Israel, okay, in the Middle East, they are going to go next. And there's going to be Lebanon, there's going to be Jordan, there's going to be Syria, even Saudi Arabia. And they will spread to Europe. What's happening in Europe right now is very dangerous. What's happening in the United States is very dangerous. Palestinianism is a virus. This is what it is. It cannot manifest anything. It's to decode a civilization. And it's not a blueprint. It was never anything original. And the similarities between Palestinianism and Islamism, it's fascinating to watch. And they are both ideologies are pushed by the Muslim Brotherhood and legitimizing Palestine and Palestinianism as resistance or as a legitimate cause is a big mistake. And the West, especially the United States, my country, America, Americans need to wake up. This is a very dangerous indoctrination. Our campuses have been radicalized. Our streets are not safe. Assassinations, shootings. This must stop. This is jihad. This is jihad. And it has been happening since 9/11 on the American soil.
When we talk about the threat to America, one of the key points of confusion has been what some have called cell phone warfare, the media jihad, the use and abuse of absolute propaganda by the Hamas since October 7th, planning premeditated, false, fake news that has actually helped confuse the West, such as Hamas detonating its own hospital or planting explosives within its own hospital, using its children as human shields, and then drawing Israel in, and then blaming Israel up front, when in fact the same thing with humanitarian aid. When all of this has been a strategic decision by Hamas as part of disinformation warfare, what can be done about that? Because if you look at the numbers, the support numbers for Israel in America, they've declined since the jihad of October 7th. And one would have thought they would have increased. And a lot of it seems, Mosab, is from this, what we call disinformation, deception warfare, which is really part of the larger war we're fighting. I want to hear your wisdom on that.
Okay. Well, first of all, there is no way to counter the strategy of weaponizing civilians. Because it's the ultimate sacrifice, and the Palestinians were willing to do that, to literally sacrifice their own children for financial and political gain, and they got what they wanted. And in the meantime, the world blamed Israel. But I want to see how far they are going to go with this lie, because it's just a matter of time before the action of Palestinianism on the American soil would breed terrorism. And America does not tolerate such acts. America does not tolerate violence. The American economy cannot survive if violence erupts in the United States. And this is what America needs to wake up to. The radicalization of Americans, of American students, by the means of Hollywood, mainstream media, social media, and not to mention state-sponsored bots that are known to the American government. They have invaded, they have flooded social media with so much lies. And so many people believing in this. So there is going to be a moment where they're going to drink from the same cup. And I hope that we don't reach that point where Americans have to taste what Israel has been through, to realize what it is like to be under consistent jihadi terrorist threat. And then they would realize that Israel had no choice but to go after Hamas in Gaza. And the fact that they took human shields in Gaza did not make Hamas immune, because this is not the first time they carry such campaign. And if we don't stop them, it's not going to be the last time.
Mosab Hassan Yousef, you've given us a moment of, more than a moment, but an hour of moral clarity on this, one of the darkest days that modern political history has known, that America has suffered, and that today, across the Middle East and across the West, that challenge, that threat still continues. And you've given us a lot of food for thought and a lot of time to really consider what needs to be done now to fight the September 11th jihad and the October 7th jihad, as we hope for a more stable, secure, and prosperous Middle East and a morally clear and a firm and resolute Western civilization. Thank you so much, Mosab, for your thinking on this.
Thank you for having me.